Hello, this is Michael Hexter, and welcome to Politics 2100 here on YouTube. So, this episode I'm calling Continuing Pandemic Denial, Product of the Neoliberal War on Social Democracy, Public Health. So, in this episode, I'm trying to step back and create a vision or a view of the dynamics overall of the last, not only last 40 years, but more specifically how the neoliberal project of the last 40, 45, 50 years has impacted the very specific reactions we're seeing now of the various governments in ignoring and downplaying COVID-19, the ongoing pandemic, uh, and relying principally on vaccines to combat it, or some mixture of vaccines and other measures, but but also essentially trying to declare the pandemic over. And so this is part of the overall longer term neoliberal era, even though we see signs that the neoliberal era is coming to an end in some form or another, uh, often maybe turning into something more devastatingly negative and impoverishing and uh, creating a more hostile and warming and destabilized climate and ecosphere in which we live, which neoliberalism has contributed to a great deal. But anyway, so that in other words, the rise of authoritarianism and neo-fascism, which is in some sense an outgrowth of neoliberalism, but also it's some people would argue its logical conclusion. But anyway, we see signs of various that there are pulls and pushes in other directions too that we're trying to get out of the neoliberal era in some way or another. And anyway, COVID-19 has occurred, and this pandemic that is lasting now almost 3 years if you count its outbreak in China in late 2019, and soon 3 years in other parts of the world as well. And there are signs, for instance, now in China, there are, from the latest reports by Eric Feig, I think his name, you say his name, Feigl Ding. Anyway, the epidemiologist Eric Feigl Ding is warning about, and other people also, BBC reports about China also changing its COVID policy, and in some sense throwing up its hands, relatively speaking, and allowing the virus to run rampant in China as well, with potentially catastrophic or outcomes for both public health and for that economy and our economy, the global economy as well. But anyway, so the we've seen it for the last year and a half or so. Governments trying to get out of the role of guaranteeing public health, or of trying their best to create to combat the illness, and to create also a safe environment for as many people as possible to live and to thrive in our society, including various forms of stay-at-home orders or remote work orders if possible, or various support schemes, including student loan forbearance, and also payments to families of various kinds that were child tax credits, a lot of different support schemes that were a form of mini, what I call social democracy. So that social, not only me, but anyway, but I highlight that they're social democratic impulses. And the idea in social democracy is that the government is a regulator of capitalism, and steps in and fills in, both regulates capitalist enterprises, also steps in with various payments and various public goods and public institutions, government institutions or quasi-governmental institutions, to take the rough edges off capitalism, and in this case also a pandemic. And so public health is a strong form of or robust public health measures are a strong form of a public good, and also of a government that is a protector of the general welfare. And the idea of government as protector of a general welfare, even against capitalists, also protector against also foreign invaders. That's another feature of the social democracy slash New Deal social democracy. In the United States, the New Deal had tended toward social democracy, and that is being suppressed. That has been suppressed by neoliberalism. That memory, including the neoliberal Democratic Party, trying to sideline the New Deal as being an important aspect of its own legacy, and so that has been the project of the Democratic Leadership Council, from which Bill Clinton was one of the leaders or one of the leading lights of, and then that whole neoliberal turn in the Democratic Party, turning away from the legacy of the New Deal, but also prior to that, also the Republican Party becoming the aggressive vehicle of deregulation and also anti-union activity. There was a tripartite alliance in the old, sort of semi-New Deal America of the post-war period, where labor was sort of a junior partner to capital and government, and then basically with Reagan they were cut loose and no longer considered to be a junior partner in governing, in supporting the social contract. So anyway, the entire political process that I've been describing in the last year or so on Politics 2100, and also before then, can be characterized as sort of this good cop, bad cop routine between the Democratic and Republican Party, and the role of the donor class in keeping this sort of colorful facade going of politics where we have we have choice, we have real choice, but it's still a choice between two parties that are in economic terms and in fundamental power terms are subservient to the donor class. And they cover up the role of the donors by being varyingly, sort of quote unquote conservative or right wing, or even, and now increasingly neo-fascist. And so that it's kind of breaking up in a way the good cop, bad cop routine to some degree, but still the Democrats playing quote unquote the good cop in that play. But in any case, that whole game is about avoiding and suppressing and sidelining and distracting from the social democratic, I would say, alternative that, for instance, Bernie Sanders represents. He calls himself a democratic socialist. He references often the social democratic regimes that sort of exist and are also under attack in other countries, but they still have had a much longer history of and are considered to be the common sense of many Western European countries and the Nordic countries in particular, but also most other developed countries have institutions that are much stronger, social welfare institutions that are much stronger, that even though the parties that are in power are not necessarily the Social Democratic Party, and in many ways, the parties that call themselves Social Democratic or socialist in those countries have become neoliberal in some of their interests and impulses and so forth and so on, and their economic policies. Still, there are key social welfare provisions like health care and unemployment benefits and vacation time and all these different things that are child pronatal policies to help families with young children with baby in terms of the birth of children and so forth and so on, paternity leave, parental leave, all these things being guaranteed in many of those countries. Anyway, that social democracy is something that the U.S. system is resisting implementing and is creating a political system which, in both alternatives, tries to deny and tries to push aside that path, and often, in some sense, by ignoring those social systems. In other words, a simple journey and meeting of people in a place like France or in Germany or in somewhere else where you talk about their social systems, they will tell you, you will immediately get a sense of their relative support from government relative to the United States and people. But on the other hand, our media, our whole political discussion acts as if those are they don't exist. Basically, most people don't know about that, and or it's considered to be a left-wing preoccupation, a pro-social democratic, which happens to be in the United States a far left, even though it isn't very far left. It's sort of slightly left of center in my opinion, but in any case, in the global sense of the political spectrum. But in the U.S., our Overton window is so pushed to the right that that a moderate social democratic advocacy, for instance, Bernie Sanders, who's not, in my opinion, a fire-breathing radical, but is a kind of a New Deal social democratic person or advocate for those things in an era when that is far to the left of the common sense of the era in American politics. But anyway, that's considered to be left. But anyway, the denial of COVID-19. So we had a glimpse and people had a glimpse of a different society and a different role of government in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, when first the Trump administration, not exactly a far right-wing government, and then also, but also with populist components to it, and also something of within the spectrum of the GOP with some maverick tendencies, within the spectrum of the GOP, and with regard to things like social welfare and support and Trump's desire to appear to be magnanimous and generous, and to curry favor in some sense to win political office, as many politicians do. So in some sense, being a typical politician in the context of the pandemic, but then also the Biden administration coming in and the Democrats also attempting to appear to be the better protectors of the public health, public welfare, but pretty quickly dropping that approach, and also Democrats like Eric Adams pretty much entirely, the mayor of New York City, entirely dropping the approach to social support and social welfare as being critical in and in the context of public health, in order to keep commerce circulating. In other words, getting people to mingle in bars without masks and so forth and so on, and just creating allowing all restrictions or as many restrictions as possible to lapse in the area of COVID-19 anti-pandemic measures. And so anyway, so the effort to basically quote unquote normalize society as quickly as possible and to simply lapse. So we had a collapse of measures against COVID-19, with the exception of some fitful sending out tests, sending out COVID tests, and also attempting to push forward vaccines as being, the strategy. And so without things that would interfere with commerce, for instance, like wearing a mask, as doesn't necessarily interfere with all kinds of commerce, but it certainly cuts down on the social networking aspects of commerce, and it makes it more difficult to, and also, obviously in public places where you eat with other people, so forth and so on. It by relaxing those things, you encourage, obviously, transmission of COVID-19. And so we're seeing, anyway, now in New York City, and particularly in New York, and then but also in some other places in the country, spikes in both deaths and also new infections of COVID-19. I think about 40% or so in the last 14 days, 50%. So it's quite steep, quite a steep uptick in infections and in deaths. So because of new variants are also more infective than the previous variants, and they are also deadly in some people. So and so anyway, so that we have then a basically, this might, if hospitals become overloaded, and if we have a new sort of horrors, so to speak, that are visible, that interfere with general commerce and so on and so on, there might be a return to some restrictions and some rules that might affect the speed or the increase in, or maybe even eventually decrease again the new infections, level of new infections, and also, let's hope, deaths as well. But anyway, this overall, none of this is surprising in terms of the response of government, if you think about neoliberalism and think about public health as an element, as an anti-neoliberal, social democratic program of government. And so this is one would need, in some sense, a call to arms in a certain way, even though this many people find, and I find, but I comply with my own set of public health measures. I wear a mask indoors wherever I can, and so forth, so on, and still, and I look forward to the day when I don't have to do that. But right now, I see it as, given the rate of infection and so forth and so on, and the infectivity of those variants, and having had COVID last year, so forth and so on, I want to avoid getting it again. And so I wear a mask where I can, but and avoid certain contexts. But I have also loosened some of my other ones. I've eaten inside in some restaurants and so forth and so on, but I try to avoid it as much as possible. And I do my own personal public health scan of the room and so forth and so on, to see if I feel comfortable doing it. So, but it shouldn't be so much up to me in my own personal, whatever, devotion to my own health, and also devotion to public health more generally as a public good, that it should be more of a concerted effort, okay, led by government, and there are reasonable in between ways to do it without making this a so onerous, and also by not necessarily interfering with commerce as much as people fear, but it has become a, again, politicized, or with, let's say, Manichaean sort of contrast that people make between either the zero COVID of China, which was way too strict and too onerous for the Chinese people, and also a total let's let it rip policy that many governments in many places are following currently in the United States. And let's hope it doesn't lead to too much more death. But currently, certainly in New York and maybe some other places, or I'm familiar mostly with this area. It is not working currently, and so anyway, this overview is an sort of part of the general discourse that I hope to continue in Politics 2100, in talking about social democracy as being sort of this reasonable, not very radical structure of ideas about the relationship of government to business or to capitalists, and also we need an enhanced, or a very much of a more dirigiste, as I use the fancy French word for this form of social democracy that is restructuring our society, which is unsustainable in its current forms, socially unsustainable, but ecologically unsustainable in almost, by the measures of physics and geophysics, and then reality and eventual economic reality, and so economic and also existential reality for humanity, flirting with extinction, in other words, of our species. So anyway, so this is I'm it's not a particularly exciting concept, but it's a concept that's very descriptive of exactly what is the rulers of our society fear. And they fear a government that will regulate them, will tax them, and will also be based on will be non-corrupt, will be, will act independently of the wishes of the donor class, will act not necessarily always against their wishes or against their interest, but will impose a long-term interest on them, and make them, certainly the more obscenely wealthy of them, less wealthy and less powerful, less able to buy off politicians, among other things. So there's a lot of different components to, or a lot of different steps to achieving this form of government that we need to address our social issues, the social dynamics, the political dynamics, the democracy dynamics that are currently in crisis. So anyway, I hope this rendition had some interesting aspects to it, and I hope or this narrative that I'm developing here, and I will maybe make it clearer in future vlogs, future episodes, why it's an important concept and why it explains a lot about U.S. politics that that are hidden, let's say, from traditional media accounts, and also from some more left-leaning accounts that don't name things, I think, with these sort of general concepts, but use people like they use a Bernie Sanders. They link it with a personality rather than a concept. So I'm trying to put the concepts that are, I think, that which these personalities are used often to represent in the media, or certainly in left, vlogosphere, so to speak. So anyway, so if please share your thoughts in the comments below, and also please subscribe to Politics 2100, and please like the video if you liked it, and also I hope to see you in the next episode.